Hello, there we go. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Open Government Keynote and Plenary Panel. We're thrilled to have you all here today. We recognize that the sun is shining and the beautiful city of Tallinn awaits us, but we're happy that you're going to let it wait a little bit longer and join us for this panel, which I think is going to be very exciting. We have an opportunity to hear from the U.S. perspective on open government, and we also have the opportunity to have what I think is going to be a very energetic conversation with the panel, which brings to the table a number, I think, of very exciting perspectives. My name is Theresa Pardo. I am the director of the Center for Technology and Government at the University at Albany in the state of New York. I'm also actually one of the conference co-chairs for ICEGOV this year, and so I would like to add my congratulations to the team in Estonia at the Governance Academy and all of their colleagues for putting together such a wonderful conference here in Estonia. And frankly, they've put a little bit of fear into my thinking these days, as ICEGOV will be in Albany, hosted by my organization next year, and I'm starting to wonder if that was such a good idea. But we will take on the challenge, and we will welcome you tomorrow officially to join us in New York. So my pleasure today is to tell you about the keynote and to introduce the keynote speaker, and then to work with the panel to moderate the conversation about open government, to contribute to the ideas that have already been put on the table. So as this slide says, Chris Vian will talk with you about open government in the U.S., outlining the directive, talking a bit about the NASA government plan in particular. NASA in the U.S. is the National Aerospace Agency, the National Aerospace Agency. And he'll close his keynote with an overview of the Open Government Partnership that was launched last week in the U.S. And but not by the U.S., but in the U.S. And Chris Vian, I think in his remarks as well, will tell you about innovation and the way he thinks about the innovation strategies and the ways that he brings those ideas to the work that he does, both in the White House and where he came from prior to that. But before we get started, I'd just like to give you a little more thorough introduction to Chris and the role that he's played in the U.S. And around the world. Chris Vian is the Deputy U.S. Chief Technology Officer for Government Innovation in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. In this role, Chris searches for those with transformative ideas, convenes those inside and outside government to explore and test those ideas, and catalyzes those results into a national action plan. Before he went to the White House, Chris was the Chief Information Officer of one of my favorite cities in the U.S., San Francisco, where he led the city to become a national force in the application of new media platforms, open source applications, and the creation of new models for expanded digital inclusion. This year, Chris was again named to the top 50 public sector CIOs by Information Week magazine. He has been named to Government Technology magazine's top 25 dreamers, doers, and drivers, and honored as the Community Broadband Visionary of the Year by the National Association of Telecommunication Officers and Advisors. Chris has brought his long-time commitment to innovation and inclusion to the work that he's done at the White House. And so I'm very, very pleased and proud to be able to have him join you here today and share his remarks on these ideas. Chris? Yes.
There we go.
There you go.
Well, every time I hear that introduction, I feel like I should be saying, and he solved world peace too. Anyway, I'm really happy to be here. It's my first time to Estonia, and it's my first time to really understand and appreciate the work that is going on in Estonia and in this region. And I marvel at what you've been able to accomplish. And I also marvel at your willingness to share your lessons learned with the rest of us as we too can have the Estonian experience and take advantage of it. When I was in San Francisco, I had the opportunity to really develop my own model. I was the Chief Information Officer for 5 years, an unheard of opportunity. And in that time in the city and county of San Francisco, I looked at an amazingly complex government structure for the city and county of San Francisco. We had a budget, an annual budget of $6.5 billion US. We had 55 departments, 120 organizations, 44 union contracts, and 30,000 employees. And I looked at the technology that was keeping that huge ship afloat. And like most organizations, we had business verticals. There were all of the transportation agencies and all of the public safety agencies and all of the health agencies. And I looked at the data and the systems and the applications that each one was using separate from the others. And I started having this picture in my head of a stick with, like the jugglers use, hats or bowls spinning. And I had all of these sticks with all of these spinning systems not working, not talking with each other. And then I looked at the private sector. In San Francisco, we are very lucky to have Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and Netflix, really leading companies. And they too had all of these systems, data, and applications moving and weren't talking to each other. And I thought, what if we could actually get them to share? What if we could start taking advantage of each other and really, truly starting to do a public-private partnership? If you've ever been in San Francisco, you also know that we are very blessed with a committed group of individuals who want to be co-creators of any solutions that are developed either in the private sector or the public sector. And we also, finally, have the proximity to Silicon Valley. And we have access to the lessons learned, the experience of all of those technology companies. And what they've described now, according to Eric Ries, a friend of mine and a best-selling author, is something called the lean startup, where what makes Silicon Valley and startup companies work is that the first thing they do is they ask the customer what they need. They take that back, they design a product or service, they then, in a minimal viable product way, put it back out in the market and let the customers or the users basically say, you got it right, or that is really bad, let me tell you how to improve it. And through that iterative process, companies are made successful because they're doing it with their customers. They're doing it with their users. What a concept. What if government didn't do an RFI and then an RFP, and then 4 years later we get something that we no longer need because we've spent 4 years following a procurement process that no longer supports our needs? I offer that as a beginning story because this was my foundation in San Francisco, and this is my foundation when I come to the White House, and I really figure out how to apply all of those lessons, all of those possibilities to the federal government. So, the theory of the case. So you might, and you should, say, Chris, sounds really good, prove it. So, what are the challenges? I think making government stronger is one of the first challenges that we have. And I believe that transparency actually makes government stronger. Because how can you improve what you can't measure? And you can't measure if you haven't released the data. Second, I think to make government more efficient, you need to participate. We need to involve our customers in our decision-making process. And the final one is collaboration. I think, and you will hear a little bit later, that a key component in the Open Government Partnership is our work with civil society organizations. And this is a new field or a new direction for many of us. And what we've come to realize is whether it's the civil society organizations or a mom and pop grocery store, other people have insight and value that we need in order to be successful. And it's through that collaboration that we truly can innovate. So how do we do that? The first and foremost point I'd like to make is that government doesn't always have to have the solution. In fact, oftentimes what government should do is create the platform to provide the infrastructure, the data, the systems, whatever it is, so that others can create on top of that and potentially compete against each other. The second is that we need to catalyze information and growth, innovation and growth. Innovation now is kind of the buzzword. It's the latest word about what we need to be doing. We need to be innovative. We need to innovate. In fact, my title is Deputy United States Chief Technology Officer for Government Innovation. It's a really long title. It's hard to fit on a card. And we use this word catalyze, but it really is to cause innovation and growth to happen. And finally, and much of what you all know, is that technology is a key enabler. In my cell phone, I have more technology and computing power than NASA had when they put the man on the moon. In my backpack, I've got a greeting card that has a little chip on there that sings a song to me. I'm going to throw that card away, but what it signifies, though, in that little chip that I'm going to throw away is more computing power than all of the Allied forces had during World War II. My Game Boy that I have at home actually has more computing power than most mainframe systems of decades ago. Technology has become cheap, it's become ubiquitous, and it's become unbelievably powerful, and as a result is a prime enabler of what we're talking about. What you see on the right is an example of when I talk about government as a platform. It is data.gov, and it is where we, on the federal level, have released about 300,000 data sets to the public for use. Another example is challenge.gov, where we have actually gotten legislation passed, the America Competes Act, that allows us to create challenges and potentially give prizes away to actually focus citizens, small business, on solution delivery and use the prize or the challenge, which you're going to hear much more about, as the enticing factor. So I'm going to offer you 4 reasons why I think this is working. The first is recalls.gov. 6 federal agencies of the United States government banded together, and they created www.recalls.gov, and it is the one source for all recall information in the United States. And you can have it on your computer, you can have it on your phone, and when you go to a store and you're wondering, has that toy been recalled? Or there's a recall notice and you want to know, is it affecting something that you already have? You just punch it into your cell phone and you know immediately. One of my favorites, Mom Maps. Mom Maps was started by a mother in San Francisco who had a little programming background, and she had a child and had some time on her hands, and found, much to my chagrin, the Rec and Park Department's website to be very lacking in useful information for her with her children. It didn't give enough information about what sites were open, what times they were open, and other types of information. So she created this iPhone app that lists all of those in an easy-to-use application, that not only provides the information, but is providing an opportunity for young parents across the city to communicate with each other, to share stories about what parks, what services are working for them. And they now have meetups, and it's developing communities within the community. And it's also providing a feedback loop to the city. The city now knows what's working and what isn't, and watches this just like they watch Twitter or read the paper to understand what they need to be doing to improve their services. This is a small startup company in San Diego who, by scraping data from the Department of Labor in Washington, D.C., discovered that 401k data, $4 billion in excess fees are being charged every year for the administration of 401k plans. They are creating a successful business out of understanding the power of that data and how they can use that data to actually provide societal value and services. And last but not least, this is one of my favorite projects from my time in San Francisco. We have in San Francisco a world-class museum, and it has a living roof, and you will see that in the bottom section. And we know that this world-class museum is not attracting kids, at-risk youth from poor neighborhoods. So I went to a gaming company and I said, I want to reach those kids. Design a game for me that will allow us to educate, to excite, and to keep these kids out of trouble. What you're seeing is a prototype version of that, a kind of Second Life type of application, where a docent is actually teaching them inside this game about California botany and all of the plants that are growing on top of that museum. And the outcome of this particular application is that we have successfully kept hundreds of students from getting into trouble, and we now have a pipeline to the museum, but we also have a pipeline of the museum back to the community in ways that we would never have had before. So, what are our tools to make this work? The first, as promised, is open government. On his very first day in office, the president signaled his commitment to open government by releasing a memorandum on open government that talked about transparency, accountability, and participation. In 120 days, the federal government and all of the major cabinet agencies did the following. They identified 3 high-value data sets to be released to the public. They created a website to start the conversation with American citizens about open government in their area, and they started work on an open government plan that they developed over the next year, and we have been following and using as our blueprint. The reasons for this are clear. The first, as you can read, transparency is a wonderful, or sunlight I should say, is a wonderful opportunity to show what's really going on. Now, whether anybody actually looks at it, maybe not the issue, but the issue is just knowing that information is out there is a prime motivator. The second is that the president understands what technology can do. And third, he understands that knowledge is widely dispersed, and government individuals, government leaders, don't have a monopoly on information, and it's actually the totality of the American public that we really need to interact with to truly tackle the tough challenges that we face. So we, I think last week, released our status report on how well we've been doing. And as was promised, this is a page from the NASA's OpenGov plan and their success. And what you will see here is that NASA has implemented open government from its vision, its policies and procedures, its daily operations, and how they actually affect their mission in space. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in the plan going forward. The other thing that we have done, as I described, is released data. But the point I want to talk about here is that it's not just the federal government that's done this. You will see that 29 states, 11 US cities, 172 agencies within the government, but 21 countries have followed this model. And as an example of what's happening, if you want inside government or anywhere else to see what the federal government, the US federal government, believes is important from a research and development standpoint across the entire government, we've created a place for anybody to go, whether you're a small business or an international company, to see what we're doing, what we're spending on our money on, and releasing tools for you to use that data to create more value. Smart disclosure. It is not enough to release data. Data in itself is very interesting, but it has no value. What we are now working with is identifying specific problems and saying to solve that problem, not only do we need to identify what information, what ideas, what data is available within government, we also need to work on the private sector and figure out what information and data they may have in order to allow consumers to make better informed decisions. And the example that you're seeing in front of you was launched roughly in June by our Health and Human Services Agency, and in it is an application where any American citizen who is about to have a health procedure can go to the website and they can find out in their locality what the procedure is going to cost and what different insurance companies are going to reimburse for that procedure, as well as what the quality of that procedure is within that state, within that locality. And what we're finding is that people are making different decisions about where they go for their health care based on experience, based on actual data, not on sales brochures or necessarily where insurance companies send them. Data communities. This one, again, is with healthcare, and these are one-stop shops in one place. That's redundant. One-stop shops for all of the data, the applications, the community, the blogs, anything and everything you'd want to know about health data is right here. And it's an amazingly powerful tool to get the community together and moving in the same direction. Agency rules. I can't say that I'm particularly excited about regulatory work of federal government. I'm much more excited about technology and what we can accomplish. But what's amazing about this is an example of the Department of Transportation. And what they've done is they've created a website in the Department of Transportation that tells you how rulemaking works in the department. It tells you how to be effective commenting, and it provides you an opportunity of rules, and it asks people for their specific input on the rule itself, or they've taken it apart and offer aspects of it for specific comment. It is an attempt to make rulemaking accessible, to allow consumers or citizens to be informed and to have a place to participate. Freedom of information. The United States is lucky to have a law that requires that certain information be released upon request if it hasn't already been released. Freedom of information. It's something that we take for granted. However, we are not necessarily particularly good at meeting the public's demand for freedom of information data. We are behind. And what we, under the Obama administration, have been doing is trying to reduce that backlog and trying to be transparent about our efforts by creating a dashboard that shows how well or not we're doing in releasing information and giving it to the American public as they request it. So that's a little bit about where we've been. Now I'd like to talk about where we're going. And the first thing I'd like to talk about is the Open Government Partnership. I am very honored to have represented the United States to the Open Government Partnership Steering Committee. These countries on the right are the countries that were on the steering committee. And really what we did in the steering committee is take a concept, a vision of President Obama at the UN last September when he called for all governments to create their own version of open government in their nations. And as a group, we created some ideas, some platforms, and templates for how other governments could do the same. And we committed to develop plans, to have the results of those plans followed and analyzed by outside organizations, civil society organizations, and to build those plans in a collaborative and participative manner. This is a picture of the 8 presidents at the UN last week. I was lucky enough to be in the room to watch the president launch this with his co-chair, the president of Brazil. And I'd like to play a video for you, which they're actually watching in this very picture. So the only problem I see with that video is they didn't mention San Francisco, they mentioned New York City, but you can't have everything you don't want. What's especially important about the Open Government Partnership is the role of civil society groups. In fact, if you look at the membership of the steering committee of the Open Government Partnership, there are actually more open government, civil society organizations than there are government agencies in that partnership. And their participation has been invaluable as we work through the tension for their rightful pushing us to do more and are educating them on how difficult it is to actually do what they want. But I'd like to identify what we in the United States are focusing on. And I will say that we did 26 different proposals. Obviously, I'm not going to talk to you about all 26, so you don't have to worry about that. But I think that, just to let you know, there were 3 grand challenges, and we have 1 year to accomplish all 26. And we have quarterly reports that will be made public on websites, and we will be tracked by outside organizations. So it will be very hard for governments of those 8 that committed and released plans to actually hide anything. If we succeed, we will be credited for our success. If we don't, we will be held accountable on the international stage. And that is an incredible incentive to do a lot of work. The first is we are launching We the People, and this is probably akin to what Latvia has done, but it's an online petition process for the American people to speak directly to the White House and let us know exactly what they want us to be working on, and it is reviewed by White House officials and turned into policy proposals. Not surprising. It wasn't surprising to us anyway, that the legalizing marijuana folks were one of the first groups to let us know that that's their #1 priority for petitioning, and that's great. But we also heard from other organizations about other issues that we will be responding to. I must admit, this is a new concept to me, but it is very, very valuable across the world. It has to do with extractive industries, and it has to do with, for those countries minerally rich, if that's the word, what actually is being given away and how much money is being earned by governments to have those organizations doing business within their country. It is an amazingly powerful thing when I hear of stories in Africa or elsewhere where there have been business arrangements, shall we say, for years that are not paying back or reimbursing the host company or country adequately for the extraction of those resources. The United States is committing to those principles, and we will take a leadership role across the world in helping those countries deal with this issue. Foreign assistance. Not only are we providing data on our foreign assistance, but we're helping people understand the data, and we will be working to not only improve that data, but to improve the ability to access that data and understand it. We will be expanding data and specifically helping Americans understand how better our regulations work, and streamlining using technology how we will do outreach for regulations. We will open source our data.gov platform and make it available for the rest of the world. Oh, and by the way, we will also be doing that for our petition platform, open sourcing it and making it available to any government that wants to use it. Encourage communications. I personally am responsible for building something called ExpertNet. And the idea, again, is that on a particular subject, we know that there are people with amazing knowledge, skills, and expertise, and we just don't know where they are. So we're going to be developing a tool, a prototype of a tool, to actually find those people and develop a focused conversation. Tools at our disposal, open innovation. I talked a little bit about government, business, the individual as co-creator. And what I want to say is that it's the sweet spot in between all of those three that the experience of innovation comes out. And that really is what we're trying to get at, that experience of innovation. Because what we're trying to do is become an impatient convener of finding out where that data is and releasing it, democratizing it, to create market transparency for that data, to make sure that there's both product and price information in that data so people can make better decisions. That we're creating an ecosystem around that because that data does no good if no one's looking at it. And last but not least, we're trying to build the capacity for innovation. There are a couple points that I'd like to make. The first is, when it comes to data, we believe that data should be liquid. And by that, I mean, in this case, this is our Veterans Administration website. What we have built is a capability for any vet that served any time in the American military to be able to hit a button, figuratively in this case, the blue button, and they will be able to download a copy of their patient history, their patient record. And they will be able to take that and do with it whatever they want. They could share it with their family, they could take it to their doctor, they could do nothing with it. But it is their data. And we believe that data needs to be liquid in that it shouldn't just sit in an envelope or in the doctor's office in this case. It should be used in any way that the owner of that data so chooses. Now, there's a responsibility that comes with this. I'm not going to say that it's all great and good, but it is the individual's right and responsibility to be able to manage their data. Data, again, is not good unless you do something with it. And I use this because oftentimes what I hear from law enforcement agencies is, oh, that's well and good for, yeah, that health stuff, that's great, but not for law enforcement because, we're catching bad guys and there's just no room for it. FBI is doing amazing things with creating applications, and this one literally is allowing officers to have access to an international database of tattoos and markings because many gangs use tattoos and marks to identify their gang members. And so what happens now is the field officer can have access and can literally take a picture of that tattoo and compare it to the database to see if this particular individual is part of a known gang and then make decisions accordingly. Market transparency. I travel a lot. I still live in San Francisco, and so I commute to Washington, D.C. So sites like Kayak are very important to me because they help me make informed purchasing decisions. And we talked about this before, but that health insurance finder really makes sure that we're not just looking at one aspect of data, we're understanding the complete value of that and helping consumers to make decisions. This is one of my favorite stories. It's important to remember that transparency, participation, and collaboration are embedded in everything that we're doing. We no longer do things just categorized by one of those. They're all embedded. And we have a defense organization in the United States that is responsible for designing, and building certain types of combat vehicles. And this one is the combat support vehicle. And remember I mentioned that we have challenges and prizes. And what we did was we said, you can win up to $10,000 if you design the next combat support vehicle. This is the picture of the combat vehicle that was the winner. It was proposed by a gentleman from Texas who was unemployed, who had no background really in this, but designed the concept. And in the end, it is what was chosen. And he is standing in front of that combat vehicle, which was just built and launched this summer in Detroit, Michigan. And don't quote me on this, but as I remember, the statistics are that it takes tens of millions of dollars to build these, and it takes 4 years to do it. This particular vehicle was built under design and built under a year at a cost of $10,000 for the competition. You can't do that for everything. I'm not saying that this is the be-all and end-all solution, but what I am saying is that we can start using these kinds of concepts, these kinds of crowdsourcing, these kinds of opportunities to reach out to people that would never be involved with their government if we didn't allow them an opportunity. I think that in order to really change government, we need to focus on culture change. And this slide is intended to say that. I think very quickly, what we need to be working on is kind of the capacity to do this. How do we find the right people in the right place and give them the right incentives to be doing this? How do we liberate the ideas? And I would argue that government, at least my experience with government officials, is we get locked into one way of thinking. And what we really need to be doing is teaching our folks to get out of that way of thinking and really start doing that lean startup approach, which is talking, gaining access, building, testing, building, testing, building, testing, and get away from the multiple award RFP process. And the last is reducing barriers. I don't know how many times I talk to people and they say, yeah, that works for you guys because you got money. Or yeah, you guys attract the best talent, or whatever the excuse may be. And it's kind of getting past the I can't because by figuring out new ways. I mean, the one that always gets me is I don't have enough money, and that's true. But there are ways to use foundations. There are ways to access different pots of money that can be done and have been successfully done in education, in health, in energy. And my job, and the job of all of us really, is to figure out how to extend those opportunities to other examples. The last thing, I'm going to actually skip this and just say a final word. And the final word actually is 3 words. The first word is, it does no good for government to think small. If we think small, we will have small solutions. If you think big and you think it is possible to design a new combat vehicle for $10,000 in prizes, imagine what that unlocks for you as a government official or you as a government worker. It doesn't pay to think small. You may not always succeed, you may not always win, but if you start here and you come down here, or you start here and you come down here, it's a huge difference. The second is that you need to roll up your sleeves because this is messy work. This is not for the faint of heart. Changing government at this level requires that you have to search out those people inside government that have not been listened to, or those people who have great ideas and just don't know where to go, and you actually empower those people to really do what they're passionate about. That takes a lot of effort and a lot of time, but once you've done it, blue button is done. That guy had that idea for 20 years. No one would listen to him until we happened to, and I can't say that it was some grand design, we just happened to listen to him and said, that makes sense, technology's there, let's do it, we did it, fantastic. And the final point that I'd like to make is that we need to inspire to create. Estonia, you're inspiring. Latvia, you're inspiring. My friends in Russia, you are inspiring. We're all inspiring. But we have to be visible, we have to be vocal, and we have to be able to communicate the possibility, because there are so few opportunities to do what we love to do in this world. There's so many reasons to get caught up in the bureaucracy of government that there has to be a reason to do that. And inspiration is the only one that I've ever found that universally works at a federal level, a state, and a local level, because we're appealing to why we work in government in the first place. And at least for me, that's to make life better for every citizen in the United States. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. That was great. I'm excited to go to the next slide. Can we get this to go back to the original opening slideshow? I guess not.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I guess that we're going to. There we go. Great, perfect. See, he really is the one of the top 50, and clearly I'm not. Thank you. What we decided to do is to integrate the Q&A for Chris's presentation into the panel. So what I'd like to do is invite the panel to take their places, and while they're doing so, introduce them to you. The long introductions, their bios are in the book, so we invite you to take a look at those while we are having our panel discussion. But briefly, let me introduce them to you as after they have taken their seats. So, going from my right to my left, we have Rick Falkvinge, who is the founder of the first pirate party in Sweden. We have, if you can, actually, I'm going to jump around on this list. We have Stefan Gehrke, who is the co-founder and member of the board of the Open Data in Germany, of Open Data Germany. We have Liia, who is the program director at e-Governance Academy, one of our marvelous hosts here in Estonia. We have Chris Vian, of course, the Deputy Chief Technology Officer with the White House in the US. And finally, we have Robert Marshall, who is a member of Parliament, joining us from Iceland. And so I would like to ask you to join me in welcoming the panel and again, thanking Chris. And so we're going to have a few formal questions and then look very forward to opening up the floor to hear from you and questions that you have from the panel. And we decided as a group to open our conversation here today with an additional perspective for the conversation, focusing very specifically on the Icelandic experience brought to you by Robert. And what we've asked him to talk with us about is the fact or the experience within Iceland, which has been quite dramatic. And we believe as a group that much can be learned by taking a close look at the events as they have and as they continue to play out in Iceland. And so some insights from the Iceland experience as a second story for our conversation today about how a focus on openness is changing the process of governing. So Robert, would you like to share with us your insights on the Iceland experience?
Thank you very much, Theresa, and thank you very much for your inspiring presentation, Chris. We have a small joke in Iceland that goes something like this, where it's a question: what do you do when you get lost in an Icelandic forest? And the answer is you stand up, because we have very small trees there. But in 2008 we got a little bit lost anyway, and it ended up with a financial crisis and a financial meltdown and the crash. Which ended up with a revolution of sorts, pots and pans revolution, which was organized with Facebook, and the end result was that we had a new government in 2009. 27 new members of parliament were elected out of 63, so it's a huge change in our government. And we've been going through all kinds of legal packages and trying to open up and replace the broken trust that we experienced in the end of 2008. Among things that we have been changing are the legislature just recently on the civil service, where we are making all kinds of improvements. We're now started to record meetings between ministers and ministries and organizations. Governmental meetings are now recorded. The recording won't be presented until 30 years later, but it changes the way we list what goes on there. And all the bookings on the meetings are presented to the public within 1 year, for example. And we're also going through our constitution. And we've used this opportunity to go through each chapter. We've elected a special constitutional board. We started by a randomly selected 1,000-person national meeting that presented the questions and theories that we wanted to research and revamp and look into. And then we elected a 25-person board that presented to us this summer a proposal for the new constitution. Now, of course, our financial situation in 2008 and what happened to us at that point had nothing to do with the constitution. But as I said in the beginning, it had to do with the trying to rebuild the trust that we lost in both the institutions, in the political parties, and so forth. And I'd just like to read to you what it says in the proposal of the new constitution of Iceland, because we have a statement in the beginning that just proposes, and it's quite beautiful in my view, because it's something that has come out of the national meeting, the constitutional board, and the way the constitutional board worked was that they presented each chapter as the work proceeded, and the public was allowed to interface with or interfere with the work via Facebook or Twitter or the internet. And there was a lot of emails and suggestions from the public while they were working. And it goes like this: we who inhabit Iceland want to create a fair society where everyone is equal. Our different origins enriches all of us as a whole, and together we have the responsibility for the legacy of the generations, land and history, nature, language and culture. Of course, this sounds very much better in Icelandic, to me in particular. But it's beautiful to me because it's something that we as a people, as a whole, have put together. It hasn't been implemented yet. There's a complex way of changing the constitution, as it should be. But I'm fairly optimistic that we will use this opportunity that was presented to us in our downfall and in our crash, and in the fact that we got lost and we had to stand up and decide what to do. So I'd just like to share that story with you to begin with.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. This raised for us, I think as a panel in our preparation this morning and a little bit before that, a question about the activity focused on open government worldwide, whether it has fully or even begun to change the mood of citizens and their commitment to engagement. And I think the Iceland story tells us very nicely that there is movement in this regard. But this is a question that I would like to pose to the panel. From your perspective, has the activity that has been focused on open government worldwide changed the mood of citizens? And if so, in what way are they engaging differently? Who would like to start? Liia.
Yes.
I'm going to stand up here so I can see you as we begin to talk.
It was very exciting for me to listen how your country is drafting a new constitution. We did this job 20 years ago. Internet was not available that time, so we published our draft 2 times in newspapers. And this 20 years period is indeed a very sharp change in our opportunities to communicate with each other. And definitely, as an open government idea, is a great idea for this conference because it puts focus on right place. This is the talk is not so much about technology, but about the content of governance. And open government means that the content needs to change. Are citizens ready for that? Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that we all dream about transparency, about public engagement. But to ask, are we able to use all resources open government is providing to us? Then it's not so easy, because even to find information from this ocean of information, it needs some knowledge and capacity. And parallelly with open government approach and change of public administration, I think we need to prepare our societies to use these resources, starting from citizens' education in our schools, also older people, so that we really profit from these new information resources we have, and about the readiness of our government to listen the voice of general public. So I'm quite optimistic that we are now in right road to get real fruits from open government.
Thank you, Liia. Rick, you wanted to jump in and...
Yeah, I have a few reflections. President Ilves opened this conference by stating, well, many interesting things, but I'd like to highlight two. One is that one of the key reasons we want transparency in government is that it breeds trust in the government. It is good for fighting corruption, it's good for all things, but also breeds trust. And the second observation is that people below 35 years of age, approximately, use the internet and communicate in ways, methods, and means that are quite simply foreign to people 2 generations ago. And herein lies a problem, because as we speak of transparent government, we are then sending the exact opposite signals to this younger generation. As the United States gave retroactive legal immunity to telecom operators for letting the NSA wiretap US civilians warrantlessly. That sends the message, we would like you to trust us, but we are not going to trust you. As the Swedish government enacted a law in the summer of 2008, saying that the government takes the right to listen to any and all of your communications without notice, in bulk, at any time. Yes, that law was passed. It's called the FRA law. That sends a very clear message. We are not going to trust you, but it would be very nice if you would trust us. There's a disconnect here. It is not enough to talk about open governments. You also need to give citizens the space, the security to trust government. And that is a civil liberties issue. Many people think or regard the internet as if it were an industry issue, trade issue, maybe a law enforcement issue. Can it make law enforcement more effective? Younger generations see it as a civil liberties issue, completely. So the next time you look at regulating the internet, I would suggest that you take the additional perspective and ask yourself, would this legislation be okay if it were applied to pen and paper and the postal system or the telephone? Odds is that it wouldn't be okay to say open every letter because some could contain copyright infringements, for instance. So I'd like to add that additional perspective of trust.
Great, thank you very much. Any last comments on this? Go ahead, Stefan.
It's very important that the people have trust. You just can't give them the tools and say, and please people now participate. We have a lot of participation tools in Germany, participatory budgeting, for example, where in some local areas it works very well. In some others it's not working, and the people ask themselves, we give you the chance to participate now, why don't you do it? Because I think in some reasons it's because they say, it doesn't matter if I participate or not because it's not changing anything. Or the tools are not, another thing, the tools are not usable. They're too complicated. Technique is more important than maybe usability. And on the other hand, I think you have to empower the people to participate. That means also you have to educate the people. At the end, participation means politics. And not even because of the technical background. I think the people go to participate. They need to know what happens with that. So at the end, we talk about education again. We talk about bringing the people, empower the people to use participation.
Thank you. Any questions for the panel before we go forward with a complementary question about the public servants who are charged with this responsibility? Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'd like to have a question to Chris regarding his remark. I think it's a remarkable remark, if I can say so, that there is a lot of knowledge disposed in the society, and the task is to capture that knowledge, not to get access to do something with it. And of course, we've heard in a lot of presentations in this session and other that it's not so easy, actually, because of the government structures, and you demonstrated that the budget and the structure of governments is so complex. So what would be your action plan in terms of capturing that knowledge and involving, for example, if there is any discussions going on specific issues, or how it would be organized or conceptually or practically? I know that there is, of course, in the United States, California Speaks Initiative, Deliberation Days, when people discuss issues offline, but now technology provides other opportunities. So what would be the concept of involving that dispersed knowledge and doing something with it? Thank you.
Two immediate points. Whoops. One is that size matters. And it is very difficult the bigger the organization, the bigger the government, the more difficult it is to do what you're describing and what I talked about. And I think the other is that you have to have multiple methods to do this. You can't just depend on one thing. I agree, education is very important. But I think that the way the Obama administration has structured our Open Government Initiative is that we are not dictating to the major federal agencies what they do and how you do that. But I think we empower the federal agencies to do it, and in the National Action Plan, we commit to actually holding them accountable for their work. Very specifically. One of the things that we are working with, and there are fancy names for this, but they're ideation platforms. And the idea is that you take a topic or a question and you post it, and you allow people on the net or in this application to identify themselves or not identify themselves, talk about the particular issue, raise it, and then through crowdsourcing and voting, the top ideas go up. Not the most exciting tool, but one that works fairly well. And we are trying to figure out how to use that and other tools, and certainly you have lessons learned as you go through that, but basically use tools like that to work with the citizens. And the last thing I'll say is that, you know, in the United States, different levels of government do different things. Local government does many more things specifically for an individual. Gives you a driver's license, so I guess that's state government, but fills the potholes, you know, whatever it's going to be. And it's much easier to have a conversation with citizens at that level. When you get to the federal level, you're talking about broad policy objectives and regulations. And back to the earlier point, it is difficult to get people to really involve themselves in transportation regulations unless you're in the industry or you're a lobbyist. So we do struggle with how to do that, but we do have tools, tried and true tools, and we try to share them as much as possible.
Great. Would any of the panel like to weigh in on this question or comment on further? Great. Salim, you had a question as well.
Well, I would like to address the issue of trust, as Rick was mentioning, although the example I'll pick is from the United States. If I were an American citizen, I wouldn't feel mistrusted if the government does not declare or publish why John Kennedy was assassinated, what are the internal investigations of September 11 or Halliburton's billion-dollar activities in Iraq. There are certain things that I don't expect my government to publish, to be open about. I doubt whether this thing is really will make the difference between being trusted or trust the government. So I think the main issue here is to define the scope, the circle where, let's say, publishable or openness of data, and then we can define easily what's the definition of mutual trust. I think this is a vague territory. It needs a lot of research with sharing experiences from different countries, but this is the point I wanted to make. Thank you.
Great. So Stefan, jump in, and Rick, and then we'll
I think this is a very important remark, because total transparency also means total distrust in a way. If you have total transparency, you have two machines talking to each other, and that's boring, that's not human. And this is why trust is so important. If you trust the government, you allow secrets. And I think in politics, there must be some secrets. It's like playing chess. When you know everything the other one, your opponent is doing, it's a boring game. So I think it's not very easy to say that, but total transparency is not working. This is maybe what you said, and the more important is the trust. And more transparency, I think, is on the right way to more trust, but 100% transparency is not working. Philosophical question, maybe.
Rick, and then Robert wants to weigh in, and Liia as well.
Right.
Wonderful.
I agree completely with this observation. However, on the same level, you can't have one secret book and one open book. If I had an expenses account and told the public that you can see this list of expenses, and then I have this secret list which you can't see, what they're going to see is I have a secret list. Coming back to the younger generation again, they feel disenfranchised. When there are secret negotiations going on, and I'm thinking specifically about the ACTA negotiations, they are seeing that this will impact what they can write and talk about. It has a direct impact on their civil liberties. It doesn't matter how transparent you are in government, because they will see secret talks going on that will restrict how they can use a pen and paper, or their equivalent of pen and paper. So, yes, obviously there are some things that need to be secret. I wouldn't want public health records to be totally transparent. I wouldn't want anybody to see when I go to the doctor and why. But there are things which has an impact on the feeling of enfranchisement.
Great. Robert, you wanted to?
Well, we've just been going through work on our Information Act in Iceland, and we're making a few changes to it that have to do with transparency. Of course, there are instances where things have to remain a secret, but it has to be listed what they are. And we've added into our information law that if a person or a journalist or a citizen asks for a specific kind of information, the institution or the government has to provide a list of all relevant information, everything that he might have been inquiring about, whether or not the question is unspecific or not. Also, we've included all companies owned by the state or municipalities, and opened up as well cases where if people want to find out expenditure when it comes to wages and those kinds of things for public servants. But there is an episode that in the British sitcom Yes Minister, that's a favorite of mine, that actually has the name Open Government. You've probably seen it as well as I have, where the permanent secretary says to the minister, open government, it's a contradiction in terms. Either you have open or you have government. but we're going the different direction in Iceland.
So Liia, you also wanted to jump in on this conversation about trust.
It's about transparency. When we passed the Public Information Act in Estonia, we stated that all information of public sector is almost public. And afterwards it appeared that not all information, public information is actually public. But this principle of having access to public information was so basic. So our approach is that in principle, yes, public sector information should be public in case there is no restrictions provided by law. But for democracy, it is not so simple picture that more transparency you have in your government, more trust you have, especially for countries coming from the sad past. The transparency sometimes may cause mistrust because people don't actually understand the political process, don't understand the compromises what politicians are doing, and this kitchen side of political process may not be so pleasant. But to involve people and to let people to know how things go in politics is very important. And I believe that if people are involved and can participate in real political process, make their own proposals, to debate about different approaches, then this understanding of how politics is working we will overcome this temporary mistrust and create a better situation of democracy in our society. So my argument was so simply that we need to understand that transparency is not the only aspect creating democracy. There is engagement, public participation, which creates understanding and trust.
Great. Thank you very much. We have a question right here.
Thank you. I have a question about the Open Government Partnership. I was wondering what criteria were used to pick the members. Were these national governments that volunteered, or was there a qualification for membership? And if so, do you see it, I guess the question for Chris, I mean, do you see it being extended? A slightly mischievous follow-up. Also, you made the welcome announcement that the We the People platform would be available as an open source for other governments to use. I just wondered if the federal government had actually looked elsewhere in the world for an e-petitioning, an open source e-petitioning that it could have borrowed without cost to the US taxpayer.
Let's start with the first one, which is that I can't say that there was any publicized criteria. Obviously there wasn't, in how the partnership formed. It happened to form out of people in countries and leaders of those countries who heard the president's call for greater international open government. People stepped forward, offered their services, and the group formed. There were originally 9 countries who were part of that partnership. India decided to step out of the partnership because they didn't necessarily want to open themselves up to outside review and criticism. We hope that India will come back. I think once the push to get the open government partnership in place, we immediately started thinking about what needs to happen to it, where it's going to go, and its ultimate impact. And what we decided to do in building the framework was come up with chairs. Brazil and United States were the first 2 chairs. United States is stepping down from chairmanship. Brazil is continuing on to the next year, and other countries are now vying or offering to become the co-chair with Brazil, so that there's kind of a stepstone of leadership. And I think that as the organization becomes more mature, as we get more experience beyond the 8 countries, with the 38 countries who have committed to doing a plan, and next year at the UN General Assembly to launch their plans, we will have more experience, and the partnership will become something greater, something more than it is right now. But similar to what we were just talking about in terms of trust, I see that as an evolution, a journey. Open Government Partnership started as an idea and a group of concerned countries trying to make that idea into something, and we will see that continue on as it goes forward. The second question was, yes, the United States did look at a number of other, Latvia, for example, very close, has something similar. In our analysis, the various products that are out there didn't exactly meet our needs. We already had staff, we created ourselves, and we built the application. By offering it up as an open source solution, which will happen over the next year, we by no means mean to imply that it is the only application for this type of work, nor that anyone else is better or worse. But we saw it as an indication that one can create technology or use technology to create a product and service, and simply by indicating that it can be made open source, we're letting the world know that applications should be shared. Whether it's our application or not, doesn't matter. It's that we should all be moving toward creating applications that can be shared, and to your point, governments don't have to spend money when they've already been built.
Other questions before we go on? One of the last questions that we might want to touch on is the idea of public servants. We've talked a lot about developing scopes of data, what does get shared, what doesn't get shared, about the capacity building issues. And so in terms of our efforts as governments to move forward here, what are your opinions, your thoughts on how we can best equip the public servant, the public manager, who is worldwide now trying to wrestle with the new responsibilities that they have been handed to implement open government strategies? What are your thoughts on what we can do to equip the public servants as well as we are trying to equip the citizens? Anybody? Stefan?
As I said before, it's important to empower the people to use these participation tools, and on the other hand, it's very important to empower the civil servants, because if I look at Germany, where I'm from, there is a top-down approach. That means a civil servant is not able to say anything to the outside before he uses his chain. Yeah? He has to go to the top and has to ask, and then okay, and then it goes back. So it's not very. Then it's in the heart of every civil servant, and I think you have to really empower them. You have to change this culture if you want real openness. And again, we can look at the United States, or we can look at the Netherlands. United States has a social network for civil servants called GovLoop. It's private. And in the Netherlands, there is a social network for civil servants called Ambtenaar 2.0. Ambtenaar means civil servant. And this is a kind of safe area for civil servants to exchange themselves. It's like a Facebook for civil servants. Mm-hmm. And it's in a way, when you see it, you think, why hasn't it been built before? Because it's very easy that someone working in the north of a country has a problem and wants to do something, wants to change something. I call these guys always the change agents in the agencies. And another one in the south has the same problem, and normally they have no chance to get to each other and to communicate about the problem and to find a solution. And so maybe one thing is that there should be everywhere in every country social networks for civil servants, open or closed. It's the decision the country has to make, or the civil servants have to make. In Holland and in the United States, they are both open, so that also consultants can come in. But it's working, and it's growing and growing, and I think this is one way on the first step to change the culture. Very important.
Thank you. Anyone else want to weigh in on that before we begin to close down our session today? Liia, go ahead.
Maybe what is not so popular to talk about the legal rules and regulations, but the fact is that civil service is very much based on legal framework where people work, they know what is their job to do, and to speak about public engagement, dialogue with interest groups, we need to realize that it needs time, it needs people who have training how to manage public participation. Therefore, speaking about open government, it's not, indeed, it's about technology, but it means also that we need to have new skills. We need to support civil servants to change the way how they work. It's not coming by itself. It's a complicated task and part of administrative reform process.
Great. I saw one more hand. And two, but we are straight up to 6 o'clock. What time are the buses coming?
6:30.
Okay, so we'll indulge one more, and then we'll ask for the.
Thank you very much. My question is to Mr. Vane. I like very much your presentation. It reminds me like John Postel's RFCs or GPL. And my question is, if you allow me, I have two questions. So, okay, this question is very simple. You said about open source application, making it open source available. Are we talking about the classic open source, the same that Open Source Society is promoting?
It's question number one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Question number two. I was
thank
kidding.
you. The second one is pretty hard, and I don't know how to formulate it, but I'll do my best. For example, for the last 2 days, we have been using Facebook to share all the information that we have here with my colleagues in my country, in Tajikistan, and they are also participating in this in this conference through the Facebook and other means. But at the same time, now social networks like Facebook and Twitter creates a kind of fear in countries like Central Asia and other former Soviet countries, particularly after what happened in Moldova, like Twitter revolution, or in Iran or in Middle East countries. Though I personally do not believe that this technologies brings the revolution. They might bring a revolution, but in other sense, in the sense of information age, but not in the sense of industry society. But for perhaps it is for satisfaction of some group of politics, ego of some politicians. It is interpreted that as if this revolution happened because of these technologies. At the same time, this kind of speculation creates new barriers in those countries that understood the power of technologies. For example, in my country now, technologies is not only used, but also new technologies are adapted and even created, like 5G conception was patented in Tajikistan and was created in Tajikistan.
Excuse me.
So I just wanted to say that where is the border that open document, open data, which is very beautiful, very good idea, by encouraging some countries to be more creative, does not discourage other countries, developing countries, to remain consumers and to be to lose the opportunity to be creative. This is my question.
Okay.
Thank you.
So since
Okay, we're going to keep this very short.
very short, okay. So the answer to your first question is that open standards based it's not necessarily open source, it's open standards based so that it can be more easily shared. Second is that whether it's Facebook or the successor to Facebook, which we may not know yet, but there will be a successor to Facebook, and that's what technology is about. There's always something new. That I think there is a risk, as you say, that the communication channel, which is, in my opinion, what Facebook or Twitter or Flickr or whatever, they're just very effective and efficient ways of communicating, that they can be used for different purposes, and therefore they can be interpreted by different people for different things. And I think we're never going to get around that. There is just, it is what it is. But I think what we can be sure of is that if something gets stopped, there's always going to be something else coming behind. And there's always going to be some other application, social media tool, or something we haven't dreamed of. And while you can slow down certain things, you can never really stop. And so again, back to my earlier comment, we're on a journey here, and I don't know where our journey is going to take us, and we may have blips along the way, but I know that what we're doing is right, and each country needs to determine for itself what is appropriate, and communication tools will only continue to make this a worldwide movement.
I want to say it a bit more direct. With a knife, you can cut bread or a throat. You know that. So it's just a tool.
Just tools. So I would like to, first of all, thank Ambassador Pult, the U.S. Ambassador to Estonia, for joining us here this afternoon. I forgot to thank you at our opening. Very, very pleased to have you here for this session, and would like to ask you to join me in thanking the panel, Chris in particular, and the other panelists for their important remarks today about open government.
And I'd like to extend that applause to our moderator, Dr. Pardo.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for staying so late, and we'll see you on the tour.